Greetings, mortals, and a capital D to all. I am your host, Simeon, and you're listening to the Library of Gnosis. Today, I have with me a very special and unique guest. Few men in the public sphere know as much about practical alchemy as this man does. A master in his own right. Frother, feel free to introduce yourself. The floor is yours.
Hey, thanks so much. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, my name is Phoenix Aurelius, and for the last 20 or more years now, about 23 years, I guess, I've been practicing Spagyria and alchemy, and I run the Phoenix Aurelius Research Academy, where I provide people with spagyric remedies and perform a tremendous amount of research on health and wellness topics and run clinical trials and other things on various different types of spagyrics, and just try and kind of bring the art out of the Middle Ages and bring it into the modern paradigm.
Well, that is necessary considering the pharmacois, also known as poisons, we have now as medicines.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, my approach is not necessarily to just completely eliminate pharmaceutical medicine, but the way that I look at it as an alchemist is that they ripped us off in the first place. They took the whole concept of combining minerals and, active constituents and esterifying them and turning, like, making more complex alkaloids and other different types of things like this. But they stopped deriving everything from nature and stopped, it just became kind of perverted once we got into synthesization in the oil industry. And so it's not that I'm opposed necessarily to the medicines they're making or even the way that they're trying to do research, but they are just going about it half-assed and completely adulterating what medicine should be in the first place,
Yeah, it's like everything else in our society. It's plastic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they recently had just done a test about maybe a year and a half ago, and they got men from all over the world, and they ended up testing them. They did women too, but they ended up testing men. There wasn't one man without nanoplastics or microplastics in his penis. And so, when we say, like, yeah, we are a plastic society, literally we're becoming plastic. We're accumulating these plastics in our own bodies through the food and the air and the soil and the water. So yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I read another study that our brain is now 0.5% plastic.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not even to talk about, I mean, people just don't realize, if you put on a hat and your hat is made out of polyester, or if it's made out of acrylic, or if it's made out of, sometimes acrylic can be natural, but mostly polyester and other different fake fabrics, that's rubbing up right on the cells of your head. And when you put on, like, earmuffs, that's right over the cells of your ears. Your cells, your skin, your tissues are going to start to absorb these microplastics because they happen from tiny little abrasions. It gets in anytime that we eat off of, like, plastic materials or with plastic spoons. I mean, it's just crazy. And we need to find, that kind of ties into my work, is that I'm really passionate about finding solutions for the modern world using a lot of ancient techniques, because even though they didn't have the same types of technologies or understanding that we did, they were much more tuned into the environment and knew what plants and what minerals and what metals and animal materials would actually provide the best sense of health and help us naturally clean. And so a big part of my research is all just based on that. What can we find in nature to help us to overcome these insane problems?
Yeah, we had it right in the 50s with glass bottles and, like, steel cases and everything. Like,
totally.
We've been reverting or
Yeah,
digressing, I guess, devolving.
exactly.
Though I don't think it's a coincidence, to be honest. I think it's very much planned this way.
You and I are on the same page, brother.
we do live. What did Keanu Reeves say? The Matrix was a documentary.
Yeah, seriously.
Anyways, I have a couple topics. Let's
Perfect.
just start with since you're an alchemist, explain to people what the Tria Prima is and how that
Yeah,
relates.
totally. So Tria Prima is an Italian term that means the first three. Essentially, what it denotes, it's a Paracelsian concept. Paracelsus came up with the Tria Prima, which he called sulfur, mercury, and salt. Now, before him, Jabir, who was an Arabic alchemist, came up with the sulfur mercury theory, which was basically like this bipolar theory that was talking about sulfur is masculine and mercury is feminine, and these two principles come together. By the time Paracelsus in the 1500s got around to that information, he said, well, look, you guys are idiots. You're always making salts and you know about salts. So we know how important they are and you're not looking at them. And also, sulfur is masculine, salt is feminine, and mercury is androgynous. It's a connector between the two. And so he ended up coming up with these three archetypes. Now, a lot of modern audiences might hear sulfur, mercury, and salt and say, oh, well, are those the chemicals? Because those are super toxic. You can't be using brimstone, metallic mercury, and sodium chloride together and expect to make medicine or make the philosopher's stone or whatever they say out of their very limited scope of understanding of alchemy. And the answer is, well, they weren't talking about those things. Now, brimstone does match the archetype of sulfur in such a way that it's perfectly flammable. When we burn it, we can get various different types of pyrolytic acids out of it that are great solvents. It burns very hot, very bright for quite a period of time, quite easily. And so it has all of the principles that the archetype of sulfur embodies. But when we say sulfur, mercury, salt, we're definitely not talking about chemical substances. We're talking about an idea. And so everything that we do in alchemy since the time of Paracelsus has kind of revolved around these three essentials of sulfur, mercury, and salt. Sulfur being a combination of the Aristotelian elements of fire and air, mercury being a combination of air and water, and salt being a combination of water and earth. And this has kind of created the entire broader cosmology of alchemical work since that time.
That's I mean, every time the authority says like, "Oh, this is toxic. This is don't." You know, I've there's actually I think I was listening to the Higher Sides chat. If you've heard of that, yeah. And he had some guy on who's like, researched this stuff. And he saw some guy on YouTube who like drank mercury and it was like, fine. So, and they were like drinking out of uranium bowls and everything. So how toxic is it really?
It's just like Paracelsus said, it really depends upon the imbalance, the individual, the dose. There's lots of different types. And also the method. Like if we breathe in mercury, significantly more harmful to us, significantly, than if we were actually eating mercury. In a healthy gut, the gut does not have a ton of permeability of mercury, so it should be able to pass through relatively quickly if there aren't a number of other cofactors that are going to cause that type of toxicity. When we're breathing it in as a gas, like people with mercury amalgam fillings are, or miners, or people who are distilling mercury, or people who are around mercury in warm environments where there's a consistent amount of vapor, that is definitely a significantly more dangerous way of interacting with it than it is through handling it with our hands or even ingesting it in small amounts. Drinking an entire cup of it, I would say let's wait 10 years and let's see how that guy is faring. But it's not going to have a major immediate effect. At least it shouldn't through that method, unless somebody has a pre-existing condition like intestinal hyperpermeability or something else.
Yeah, I also saw well, I can't remember his name, but anyways, he like I think he like took some uranium and just like ate it, and I mean he died of cancer, but
That's the thing about damage to the cells, is that it's a long and slow process. The cell tries to heal itself for years. And so when somebody says, yeah, I drank uranium and I didn't die, it's like, well, you're an idiot. You don't understand the actual mechanism of how it's going to work. It's not going to kill you immediately. Same thing with mercury. It's not going to cause immediate damage. It can, but usually it takes a while. And it's like with prolonged exposure in the cells and tissues, that those cells and tissues are not able to perform their job properly. The mercury ends up getting inside of a cell and clogging up essentially receptor sites, whether those are hormone receptor sites or nutritional receptor sites. And then the villi of the cells can't pass through the cell membrane because the cell membrane develops all this inflammation. And so it can't bring information in, and then the glutathione pathways get congested, and so they can't get toxins out. And that's a process that over multiple generations ends up causing mutations to the DNA inside of the cell and the RNA inside of the cell, because they can't get the building blocks, the nutrition that they need, and they have a super toxic cellular environment. And so it's after prolonged cellular generations of this, that we end up seeing cancers primarily developing. So, that dude with uranium, though, what's interesting, I got fired from a job one time because my urine was radioactive. And they had me do a random urinalysis. And at that time, I was drinking water that was being charged with pitch blend. Pitch blend is essentially uranium scrap. And in Colorado, inside of the United States, there's this place that has a mine that has all of this old, very, very mildly radioactive pitch blend. And there's a number of different types of mineral stone deposits that are there. And this guy named Jay Gutierrez, he has a business. I don't know if it's still around. This was like 15 years ago when I was doing this, but it was called Nighthawk Minerals. And he sold a thing called a gray stone, which was just one of the kind of quartz and granite composites of this area that had a mild uranium-based radioactive charge being put out of it. Very small, though. And so if you would stick that stone into a gallon of water for 1 hour, or maybe it was actually overnight, if I think about it now, I think it was for 8 hours or overnight. And then you come back and you take that stone out and you drink that water. Now you're getting this little tiny kind of like homeopathic dose of radiation. And it actually, what it does is it's not enough radiation to harm a healthy cell, but it is plenty of radiation to harm a cell who has cell membrane inflammation or who is already a weakened cell. So the concept of doing that was to kill off all of these unhealthy cells, and then all you have are healthy cells left, which means that you can regrow those healthy cells and actually, stop the glycation process and stop aging process and help to heal cancers and other different types of things like this. Concepts known as radiation hormesis. So I was researching that and testing it out for myself. Anything that I research, I'm my own guinea pig first and foremost. And so I was doing that, and they said, you got trace amounts of radiation in your urine. Can you explain that? I tried to explain that, but they were like, oh, okay, I don't know about this. You might be at a risk. We don't need to turn off the lights and see you glowing. So ended up firing me from the job.
I seem to remember there being what hasn't the CIA done? They're tested everything, Yeah. But they did some. I don't think it was a nuclear test, but it was something about radiation. Anyways, the plants around it, just like crop circles, with radiation, they grew faster.
It's true. That's kind of what it does, is it speeds up once the cell gets exposed to radiation. Radiation is just a higher vibration. And so it speeds up the replication processes of the cell. And that's actually part of the problem, is that if the cell speeds up and ends up duplicating before it can get all of the proper nutrients in and the toxins out during that life cycle, then what ends up happening is that those toxins come with it and the lack of nutrition at the same time. And so you have both excesses and deficiencies. And like I said, with this cell now doing it, and then it creates another cell, and that cell now 4, 5, 10, 15, 100 generations of those cells doing that, that becomes a pretty intense environment to create what's known as a cancer stem cell. And those cancer stem cells, that's actually the main thing that people need to focus on in the elimination of cancer from all of my research and experience, because cancer cells themselves are really weak. They are not strong cells, and that's why they can even be defeated with radiation treatment and with chemotherapy. And if we dare to even call that a therapy, that's a retarded name. But yes, so that's the whole concept, though, is that those cells are weak. What isn't weak is a cancer stem cell, and those cancer stem cells end up actually serving the same function as a stem cell, but being able to create new cancer cells like crazy. And they're significantly more resilient because they're a stem cell technically. And so most of the cancer research over the past 5 years in particular, 7 to 10 years broadly, but 5 years in particular, has really gone into how do we eliminate these cancer stem cells? And that answer is abundantly available with natural medicines, in fact. So
yeah, I think the Bible calls it cannabis. It's been shown to
any endocannabinoid. I mean, cannabis is so effective because the cannabinoid system runs through every cell and every joint in the body. We have these endocannabinoid receptors, and so when you take something, especially like CBD on the cellular level, when we take something like CBD, now that takes care of the cell membrane inflammation. And it goes immediately to the receptor side of the cells, and it just decreases that inflammation. And the second that inflammation decreases, now usually toxins can get out and other hormones and nutrients can get in. And what's really cool about that with CBD in particular is that it upregulates our vitamin D as well. And people don't realize that on a cellular level, we need vitamin D in our system for over 200 different gene expressions. And so the DNA, the cellular DNA, ends up utilizing that vitamin D in order to produce more healthy genes and therefore more healthy cells. So CBD is awesome. And then THC is one of those ectocannabinoids that ends up getting into the cells, especially those cancer stem cells, and telling them, shut the fuck off. Like you're not meant to be turned on in this way. Turn down. And that's what ends up making such a great effect. But there are many others besides that, bloodroot and mistletoe. And there's just so many others,
I think it was, I don't even know, Hippocrates, whatever.
Right.
He said that, fasting is one of the best ways to kill disease. Like animals, when they get sick, they starve or they fast. It heals the body, causes toxins and cancer cells. I've even heard.
Yeah. Oh yeah, man. If you can fast for 72 hours, nothing but water and as minimal water even as you possibly can, then what ends up happening? Say that again.
Oh, even water. I guess it contains toxins as well.
Well, not really, but what it does is it puts pressure on the kidneys. And so
I was talking about tap water.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You're right then. So, if we just keep, if we stay hydrated, but keep as little water in us as possible. So contrary to popular belief, I would not be drinking a ton of water during a fast, because the idea is not to tax the kidneys or tax any of the organs, because when the organs are in a state where they are unburdened by having to process and digest and everything else, then the blood moves better, the lymph moves better, the kidneys and the renal system operates better. And this allows a lot of the waste to naturally move out of the system. And our immune system almost entirely turns itself over after about 72 hours. So we can do an enormous immune reset just with fasting alone. And purgatives too. Purgatives are an important part of historical medicine. You'll find that probably 1 out of every 10 to 15 items of pharmacopoeia in the historical past. If we go back to ancient Greece and Dioscorides and other different, medicinal practitioners, all the way through the Roman Empire and into the Middle Ages, purgatives were a huge thing. You get somebody to throw up and get them to, shit all over and make them feel a whole lot better because their system is unburdened by all of these wastes that are not being processed effectively. So
it's kind of like a hangover then.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that I was actually in the process of making I just recorded it a couple days ago about sorcery, or like
Sure.
the word in Revelations, like the adulterers, the liars, whatever, lake of fire, and they translated pharmakois as sorcerers, but it's so inaccurate. It's literally means poisoner, and it also means medicine. And that's something so interesting about like the archetype of the trickster, Hermes, whatever.
Totally.
The wounded wounder who like heals, it's like the...
Yeah. It's really quite fascinating. But even Paracelsus actually touched on this in the 1500s in some of his medical texts. He would say that, and of course he was really widely known, and still is, even in medical textbooks today, for talking about the dose determining whether something is a toxin or not. But yeah, it's that same thing, is like those of us who understand healing or magic and quantum healing and different types of things like this, you understand that you have to you have to intimately come to know the inverse of that. So, if we're trying to remove curses, hexes, jinxes, psychic attack, etc., we have to understand what techniques were used in the first place in order to cause those things to happen. And the same thing is true with medicine. Like, in order to combat a particular disease or condition, we have to understand what the onset of it was and how it actually works. And, that's one of the things that's kind of very interesting about homeopathy as general practice, is that they'll take something that in a normal ordinary dose would actually cause a disease, and just by diluting it quite significantly, to 1/1,000,000th of a part, for instance, way subclinical dose, we can end up actually combating the same symptoms or conditions that that same substance would have in a larger dose. Very fascinating concept.
Does homeopathy actually work? Because I'm very skeptical about the whole premise,
Yeah, well, the truth is
Hair of a dog, maybe.
Well, yeah, and there is an art and a science to that, for sure. So I've seen it work in a number of occasions. In fact, one of the greatest homeopaths that I know is Dr. Karina Lopez. She's from New York, Puerto Rican gal, but she married a Greek guy, one of my best friends, and she now lives in Greece. So they had their son. This must have been about 5 years ago now, and he was born basically dead. He had like no color to him, and he wasn't breathing and other things like that. They immediately gave him homeopathic of arsenic, and it brought all the color back to him. His blood started flowing and he started breathing again. So that's like a really severe case where I've actually seen it work. But other cases where I've seen it work are in cases of like severe distress in damage, especially that one, antibacterial damage as well. Anytime people are taking antibiotics like ciprofloxacin or other fluoroquinolones, there's this disease or condition known as getting floxed. And it basically causes a supercoiling of the mitochondrial DNA inside of the cell. And so that disease can cause all sorts of havoc, usually on the tissues of people. I mean, they're in like agonizing pain and have tons of different issues, people who have gone through this. I've seen homeopaths be able to take and make right in front of the client or right in front of their patient a homeopathic of the same remedy they were prescribed that gave them that condition, and to success it and they go down at a very, very, very small dilution, and then they work their way up to a slightly higher dilution. And I've been able to see clients that I could not help actually end up getting helped by homeopaths using this method. So I've also seen it work really well for neuro-emotional healing, which I think is really important. You know, the principles of German New Medicine and Dr. Hammer's work are absolutely spectacular. And I think that homeopathic remedies oftentimes can help to open up the neuro-emotional pathways a little bit better than just standard physiological medicines. So I do think that they have their place, but the shit that you buy at the store that's been sitting around tons of radiation and, you know, was put on low quality milk pills and whatever else, I don't have a whole lot of good experience with those remedies. The remedies that I see that are really good are made by a homeopath specifically for you, and they are kept in a liquid form that you then apply to yourself as a liquid or put on a sugar pill or something yourself directly before taking it. The ones that you can buy oftentimes in the apotheke and in the pharmacies and stuff, I'd stay away from that.
So you've ruled out like just a placebo effect? Because the mind is a powerful thing.
Mind
the
is
universe
a powerful
is
thing.
always mind. The universe is mental.
Yeah, precisely. So you know, because of that, how can we actually rule out the mind? This is one of the things that I take into account with all of my medicine that I perform, is how much of it is the mind of the individual creating it, their intention for the individual receiving it, the mindset of the individual receiving it. I think that, you know, and even Paracelsus actually wrote about this, saying that 50% of healing is gaining the trust and the confidence of the patient. And I think that this is absolutely important, is that if a practitioner is actually certain enough that something is going to work, that certainty extends into the field of the patient, then that already is creating, from a causal level downwards, this proclivity for healing to exist. So I think that, like all things, my own philosophy on it is that healing and medicine is a very multidimensional thing, and the mind and that placebo effect is part of it. Approximately, in my opinion, about 1/4 to 1/5 of the total picture. And for me, the goal is not to try and seclude something and say, is this the only reason that it worked? But rather to say, how can I, knowing this or philosophizing that the universe is multidimensional, how can I stack dimensional potency on top of each other to have a remedy that will give the individual the greatest chance of overcoming this condition possible? And so that's my own take on things.
Holistic.
I would like to think so.
Yeah. So I just wrote down alchemy in general, both practical and spiritual, and the relationship between the inner work and the external practical.
Sure. So, man, there are so many different takes on this. There are many different takes as there are alchemical authors and kind of schools of thought. But the way that I learned and the way that I've kind of evolved has given me the present perspective that you can just perform what is referred to as spiritual alchemy or psychological alchemy or just laboratory procedures. You know, we wouldn't really call those, they would be basically like a somewhat primitive chemistry or earlier chemistry types of things if you're just doing the lab practice with alchemical philosophy, which isn't to devalue it at all. It's just you wouldn't understand the same things that most modern day chemists would, because you don't have the same frame of reference, the same words, terminology, understandings. The processes work for different reasons, things like that. But, you know, the way that I was trained was by the Rosicrucians, or very much so of the Rosicrucian tradition that really became popularized during the late 19th century occult revival, and then kind of continued on into the 20th century. And you know, in the state where I'm living right now, Utah, the largest alchemy school in the world was here until 1984. Is run by a guy named Frater Albertus, is what he called himself, but his name was Dr. Albert Riedel, and he was a Swiss guy who was absolutely an extraordinary alchemist. So a lot of his students still kicked around the area during the time that I was learning, and I found myself, trying to get into relationship with these existing students to try and pick up what I could. So even though I never got direct transmission from Frater Albertus, I have worked with and inherited a lot of materials from his students. And so I would say that I'm very much so of that tradition, also of the tradition of Jean Dubuis. And the whole concept within both of those traditions and the general Western European, we're talking Western Germany, most of France, parts of Northern Spain and England, that entire system of Rosicrucianism that came to America and kind of created Amorc, or Ancient Mystical Order, Rosicrucis. They essentially started teaching a system that was unified of spiritual, psychological, and laboratory alchemy. And I always grew up with the persuasion that these practices that we're performing in the laboratory are essentially a holographic and fractal model of the inner workings of nature, and that as we begin to utilize the processes in the lab to change these substances, there are corollaries that apply to both the spirit as well as to the soul to help to further our own transfiguration or our own transformation of self. And psychologically, there are probably more things that I can point to than spiritually, although it really depends on the author that you take a look at and what tradition that you have and how you define spirituality and spirit itself. But I remember talking with a Tibetan Lama years ago. His name was Lama Tsering. And he told me, he said, most of what the world refers to as spiritual is actually just developing the soul, and usually the lower aspect of the soul, or the ego. And so, that has always been something that sticks with me. I think that true spirit is really just developing more life force, more energy, more vitality, more passion, more, etc. in order to
Reality.
Yes, exactly. In order to have the energy stores to enact the volition of the soul through the medium of the body. And that is usually done through discipline. We tend to get more energy through things like Qigong, for instance, or Tai Chi, or through various movement practices, or through, regularly cultivating a spiritual practice or a breathing practice, or, other things like that. The things that we do with regularity consistently, when we do them, even when we don't want to do them, those tend to build up strength, and they tend to build up our resolve, and end up, kind of in general, building up our spiritual power. And I'll tell you one thing, I think that laboratory alchemy really cultivates this in a certain regard, just offhandedly, because people think like, oh, alchemy, it's so great, it's so awesome. I'll tell you, 50% of the work is just doing dishes. It really is. I mean, everything that we have in our labs, all the glassware and all the flasks and all the condensers and all the everything, they all need to be washed during the time that they're done, and then they need to be kept in good working order. And so, like, literally, you do the practice, and the practice itself of what you're seeing before you might be, if it's a distillation, a few hours to maybe 10, 12 hours or something. If it's an essential oil distillation, usually you're only running it for 3 hours or something like that. If you're working on salts, you're probably only burning something for maybe an hour or two. I mean, in terms of active time. And then once those procedures are over, everything has to be washed. And it's like at least 50% of lab work is doing dishes. And so it builds your resolve to actually do things. And you get smarter with the amount of energy that you have over time too, of, yeah, I can do that, but how much time on the back end do I really want to be putting into doing all of these dishes? And so you become rather judicious about where you even decide to spend your energy, because getting into a project is easy. Getting it to the next phase and continuing it actually takes some determination. We start to think these things through so that the actions that we perform in our laboratories end up being more efficient over time, because we're thinking about them more from beginning to end. And so, anyway, that would kind of be part of the relationship between the spiritual forms of alchemy and otherwise. My own take is very heavily influenced by a guy named Dennis William Houck, who kind of shows there's some psychological corollaries between the processes that materials can go through in the alchemical laboratory and the psycho-spiritual processes that happen internally in order to create a change of character. And that has always stuck with me since I learned that pretty early in the early days of taking on more advanced alchemical work. And so that's still the method that I teach. I call that whole system transpersonal alchemy. And it's different enough. It's definitely adapted more to laboratory work than what Dennis William Houck's version of it is, and his understanding and way of talking about it. But I was very heavily influenced by his work for sure. He was a major and quite popular author during the time that I was really getting going with my alchemical work. So,
yeah, have you heard of Rupert Sheldrake?
Oh, of course.
He talks about like how chemists, like the first time they like crystallize or synthesize a substance or chemical, it's very hard, but then it gets progressively easier for every other chemist to
Totally.
crystallize it. That's like the spirit, matter kind of related, as above, so below.
Totally, yeah. Or, even just part of what Rupert would have referred to as the morphic field or the morphogenetic field. Once something gets put in there and the pathway is traversed frequently enough, it becomes accessible to everyone,
It's like an etheric groove, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
So how does the oh, by the way, I was about to forget, jump into the next question. So I was listening to my Templar Grandmaster Timothy Hogan. He presents on the Secrets of the Knights Templar, whatever. And I was listening to, I think it was episode number 2, where he talked about how Rosicrucianism, like the Alchemical Wedding and all these texts, were actually created by the Knights Templar to recruit people. So I guess you owe the Knights Templar some for your knowledge.
Yeah. Well, who doesn't? Who doesn't? What little we actually still have left that is clearly traditional really comes to us through the holdovers of that lineage. And of course, it hasn't had one completely beautifully unbroken lineage. It kind of got fractionalized at a few points in history, but it's still mostly intact. And so, we owe a great deal of what we know and what we practice in the West to Knights Templar. So,
yeah, for sure. Also, I don't think I don't know if you want to call it initiation or like path for the Knights Templar is physical meeting. Like at least my path, it's been a lot of, I already knew things they knew, like the Divine Council and all these things, just from my own like
self-revelation or whatever. Yeah.
What do you call it?
Self-revelation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's definitely a thing. Like people who reincarnate might bring up some knowledge from, maybe it's past lives, maybe it's just accessing the ether. Not sure. Collective unconscious. Who knows?
Totally. Yeah. Well. Yeah, I could go on and on about that, I suppose, but yeah, I'll wait for your next question here.
So, I don't know if I want to bring this up. Is it a sense that I used to be a member of Amor, by the way? I was just like whatever rank that is. I was only a member for like a year or something.
Sure.
Really expensive, to be honest.
It got.
I mean, it's normal price for orders, but for like the Knights Templar, for example, it's like $50 for the book, the codex. Then that's it. That's a lifetime membership, Yeah. All the other orders are like $300 a year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or you get put on like a monthly subscription or whatever else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, personally, I walked away from all of the esoteric organizations. I was really big in following a lot of them. I was an open and invited guest to various Masonic lodges and temples out here in my area. I've been an open and invited guest into the OTO. I've been open and invited guest a lot of places. I was initiated, of course, into both the OTO initially as a 0 degree, as well as Rosicrucians. And, all of those things, what I found was that a lot of people were just kind of mentally jacking off with the information. They were just taking a look at certain things, and their lives were still in shambles. Their neighbors' lives were still in shambles. They still had poor health. They didn't have a lot of money. They weren't very successful in life by any measure. Oftentimes just very stressed out people. There was not a sense of calm, but there was a whole lot of mental knowledge about things that they felt like oh, these are the secrets of the universe. And I just thought, what a fucking pathetic group of individuals. Like it just made me so sad to see people taking all this information in and not applying it. It just made me so sad. And the other thing that I saw during the time that I was in this was that everybody was selling multi-level marketing to each other as well. It was more of a multi-level marketing meeting. You'd go and like, let's lock step, lock thumbs, heel in the crook of the foot, stand at right angles, do all this dumb shit. And then sell each other multi-level marketing stuff. And I was like, look, I get the symbolism of the ritual, but it's just lost for me in the insanity that is going on here. Like, I don't think people are really understanding what the significance is, or, there's a way of, in my opinion, of utilizing your consciousness to meet the ritual halfway. The ritual itself is just a physical maneuver. If you're not like projecting into the space what it is that you want and calling it through during any ritual work, then it becomes essentially ineffective. And so I got very jaded with a lot of these, the Golden Dawn, Rosicrucianism, Masonry, etc. I got very, very jaded with it. And it's probably a lot of what I saw in my local lodges and in my local camps and things like that, was because we live in a very highly Mormon state. And so there are a lot of individuals who are part of these organizations who are Mormon, and there's just like this weird flavor to it. And, it left a bad taste on my tongue. But I took a lot of the principles and ended up just kind of reframing them for myself and working through them. And I think Jean Dubuis' work was really instrumental to me in that way, because he always taught alchemy as a system of self-initiation. There's nobody who can possibly tell you when you're ready to go to the next degree, because the work tells you when you're ready to go to the next degree. Either when you started this thing, which is initiation, it worked out in the end, which means that you're ready to graduate to the next degree, or it didn't work out in the end, which means that you have to kind of restart the experience and reinitiate into that same degree until you can figure it out or puzzle it out or work it through or clear out your own energy enough to project properly. And in my own life, I have seen consistent progress in not just what I know, but who I am as an individual, how I'm growing as an individual psychologically and spiritually and physically, and what type of person I was versus what type of person I am today. And even just between, last year and this year, there's an enormous amount of growth that has happened as a direct result of the amount of lab work that I have done and how I've chosen to go about it. So for me, I really, really like that system. And my own experience has just been to leave a lot of the esoteric organizations as is. Still on very good terms. We speak the same language. We understand the same things. I just prefer, maybe don't go to the meetings. I'm still a part of a lot of the online groups and still get a lot of the emails and kind of stay connected that way. But yeah, it's better for me, I think, to just focus on my own work. And there's a little bit more humility and honesty for me in that path as well. And so that tends to be where I sit on that whole thing.
For me, it's like I've noticed a lot of people in these orders, like from Masons, Rosicrucians, I wouldn't say like a lot of people, but it's a trend. I notice a trend. They're very like uptight and like
too. Yeah.
yeah. That's I mean I know some Masons who are like the chillest people like
Totally.
ever, but there's some who are just like they're nerds.
Yeah, man. Well, and like, yeah, it's just if the company isn't fun, in Ireland say if the crack isn't any good, then why would I stay? And the same thing is true with a lot of those things. Was the experiences I had were just not compelling enough to say, wow, I'm really excited about this. I was like, oh man, I don't know about some of this personality here, So, and I was also very disappointed about Freemasonry because I'd always heard like, oh, they're guiding the world, they're steering the world, high level Freemasons do all of these things. My experience was that the lodges and temples that I had hardly had any fucking money at all. And so they're like holding pancake breakfasts for like $2 donations to try and raise money for their lodge to just like fix the lead pipes. And, it's like, wow, this is really pathetic. If Freemasonry was steering the world, I would expect it to have a tremendous amount more money behind it that we could take care of our own lodges and our own temples. But yeah, that wasn't the experience. So anyway.
No, but people are you do know the original purpose of the Illuminati, but like they infiltrated the Freemasonry, and that's a thing that has definitely happened throughout the years. I've heard that the British Grand Lodge is like the center of the Illuminati, whatever you want to, left-hand Masons, bad Masons.
Sure.
And these people are connected to all the Bilderberg, fucking VHF, the whole satanic, pedophile, blood-sucking adrenochrome agenda. I don't even... you might have to censor those words. Anyways, they have a lot of power. I mean, just look at the recent hurricane. I don't think that was a fucking coincidence, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think you and I are on the same page about that. But at the same time, those bastards aren't funneling any of the money down to take care of the lodges. They're doing their own thing and playing their own billionaire games and utilizing occult principles for their own gain. So, which, that for me, that crosses a system of ethics. I don't think that it's a great thing to utilize unseen forces or even seen forces for your own gain. For me, the whole goal is everybody in relationship to any transaction, whether it's a conversation or whether it's a financial transaction or whatever, it should be a net positive one where we both feel good and we got what we needed. And there's a healthy exchange that kind of goes on there. And utilizing occult forces, in my opinion, for your own gain is just one of the most primordially selfish things that can really be done, because it steals unfair advantage. Already the occult arts take quite a while to really become initiated in or adept in to any degree. And to not utilize the amount of time that you put in for the service of other people and create healthy synergy and synergistic relationships in life, but rather just for yourself, seems to me to be a little bit of an abuse of the privilege that we've had to be able to study this lineage and to learn how the inner workings of nature work in the unseen realms, in the astral and causal and spiritual realms. So yeah, and it's weird to me actually that people could put in as much time and focus on learning these things without actually bettering themselves first. That's the weird thing, is like at a certain point, I remember in my own evolution, I think a lot of us in our own evolutions, when we're young kids, when we're teenagers and whatever else, we're very much so about me, my, mine, and trying to take care of ourselves. That's actually a part of the evolution of the individual, is learning how to grow up and get out of the nest. You have to, that's like the root chakra type of shit, right? Like you've got to understand how to be able to at least survive well enough that you're not constantly in that kind of survival complex. But after a certain point, these people who are making money are no longer in that survival complex, but for whatever reason, their minds are not progressing. There's an arrested development in the mind. And so once they have all this money, the inner development, the inner character, for whatever reason, just stopped developing, in my opinion. And it looks like it just gets geared towards sociopathic behavior. You know, let me do everything that I can for my own gain. And yeah, the amount of trickery and mind games and other different types of forces that are being used and entities that are being summoned in order to drive the mass deception of the world right now is just, it's crazy. It's alarming. And as an occultist, it's easy to see through what is happening, but at the same time, trying to get other people to know and to understand what's happening can be a little difficult. There's more receptivity in my experience now than ever, but still, like, I remember 10 years ago telling people, like, yeah, look, you're not understanding how the news is actually summoning entities. Any different entity, which is an electromagnetic signature that's aware of itself, is attracted towards various astral states of being. They feed on our astral states of being in the same way that we feed on the fruits of things that grow in the ground. They're just farming reactions, emotional reactions, sadness, despair, gluttony, gloom, you know, depression, anxiety, you know, lust, any of these types of things. They're just breeding grounds for various entities that are feeding on those particular aspects of our being. And it's really clear to see when you watch any form of programming to see what types of entities are attached to it based on how it's trying to make you feel. Like horror films oftentimes attract demons and demonic activity because demons thrive on the feeling of fear and sheer terror and hopelessness and those types of things, where other interdimensional entities are thriving on, you know, disgust, deprivation, addiction, you know, anxiety, etc. And we built up an entire civilization that promotes these things. They would say that they don't, because there are organizations that are in existence to try and like find the cure to these things, but they're breeding despair by not showing the simple cures to cancer, and by hosting all of these goddamn marathons and organizations and find the cure and blah blah blah. There are a million cures that have already been found. There's not a find the fucking cure. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It's just that they are creating a sense of despair and false hope, and the entities that love that will grant whoever summoned them whatever they want, as long as we provide them with fodder to feed them. It's a very simple transaction, and anybody who's understood, you know, or studied Goetia or Solomonic magic or any form of theurgy or, you know, even Arabic, it's outlawed technically in most Arabic states, but they're still using jinn, especially in Indonesia, you know, summoning jinn. And anybody who has ever met any entity at the crossroads and understands that there's a transaction there. I have something that you want, you have something that I want. How can we do this? And the amount of deception that people are put through and their susceptibility to entities in this day and age is just fucking mind-blowing to me. It's mind-blowing. And all I can do is really, as an occultist, is stand back and say, you evil bastards, but fuck, was that genius? What a plan that was, because it's hook, line, and sinker probably for 60 to 80% of the world population. They're just, you know, right on line.
I'm gonna give a shout out to Ice is watching, Steve Ice on Rumble. Great guy when it comes to uncovering the conspiracy stuff. He calls them the humans, you know, Bill Gates or whatever, demons in charge.
Hey, brilliant term. Well, you know, this is one of the things actually that I think is really important that a lot of people can understand, is that humanity, for the most part, is being and has been hijacked by various different entities. And people are like, yeah, but I'm still me. I still have my voice. And my answer is yes, sometimes. But whenever you're outside of your head, like when you're driving your car, are you completely aware of what's going on inside of your energy body, inside of what's going on? Can you tell the difference between your internal voice and some other voice that is feeding you a thought? Are you paying attention on that level? Because if you are, then you'll notice that there are entities everywhere, and they are oftentimes influencing your behavior. They're also electromagnetic signatures. And the important part about that is that they mess with the biocircuitry of the individual once we let them in. So, when we're drunk, when we're in vast emotional states, anytime that we're really kind of like outside, if our astral body is outside of our physical body at any time, whether that's we're dreaming sometimes, whether that's we're on hallucinogenic drugs or drugs like methamphetamine or opiates or whatever else, we oftentimes are outside of our physical borders and outside of our biofield. And when we're outside, other entities make their way in, and now they have access to control various aspects of our electromagnetic signatures, because that's what they are. And the two main interfaces that we have, well, there's three. There's the cellular, of course, but then the other ones are the neurological and the endocrinological, which is literally altering neurotransmitters and nervous system signals, as well as altering hormones and endocrine system signals. And this changes our proclivities. If we feel fat and disgusting, and the entities love that feeling of disgust that we have and self-loathing, guess what they're going to do? They're going to kick in some cortisol, because they can manipulate this really quite easily, cause you some stress so that you will eat something to combat that stress with dopamine. But then dopamine ends up converting into norepinephrine and epinephrine, which ends up signaling more cortisol. And it's this just fucking cycle that people run through. And they're like, oh, why am I depressed? Why am I fat? Why am I anxious? Why am I whatever? But they're not, and they'll do everything physically, take the diet pills and the drugs their doctors prescribe them, change to stupid fad diets that obviously don't work, do all of these harmful things for themselves, but they never take a look at the spiritual or their astral wellness and say, how are the subtle dimensions affecting this rhythm and this pattern? Because I've seen in my own clinical work, when we eliminate the entities and get rid of spells, curses, hexes, jinxes, incantations, etc., psychic attack, that individuals have a much greater proclivity and a much greater strength to what would I say, maybe a better neurotransmitter, nervous system, and hormonal resistance to those types of behaviors. And so for me, it really starts at these higher dimensions and then kind of works its way down. And yeah, I think it's important. But yeah, if my whole point about that, though, was that I think that through the unethical actions that certain billionaires, almost all of them that I have ever seen advertised or spoken about, especially members of World Economic Forum and, people like Bill Gates and whatever else, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and with their money, without ever having really truly worked on themselves and all of their own insecurities, they started projecting on the world what they think they know is best. And when you have that type of power and you have those types of insecurities, the amount of entities that will prey on those insecurities are just so vast. And that is the gateway to where all of these entities end up controlling a lot of our billionaires. And if you take a look at them over a 10-year, 15-year period, 20-year period, you take a look at photos from the past and photos now, you'll see like, ooh, yeah, you can kind of tell that they're somewhat the same person, but man, did they age in weird ways that and their eyes get dark. And, you can tell when somebody is kind of spiritually and astrally possessed by these different entities. So yeah, the demons in charge, I think, is a great term, because that's who's running the show. The biological system of Bill Gates is still the biological system of that son of a bitch. And maybe somewhere buried beneath all these entities and demons are his own thoughts, but the entities are so prevalent at this point that, yeah, it's running the show. I think this is true of most positions of power. It really corrupts an individual when they're responsible for the welfare of other people. And that alone invites the stress of that alone invites a lot of entities who love to predate upon that. We can see that and point to that all throughout history.
So, psychopaths don't feel empathy. They think they're literally incapable of it. Something with the brain and stuff. I feel like empathy is like, I think the Rosicrucians call like the universal soul or whatever. I feel like
Sure.
empathy is like part of the connection you have. How does it work for like a psychopath? Like, what's up with those? What happens to the soul? You know, all this.
Yeah, you know, the best way that I can explain it is that the soul gets shut down at a pretty early age as a result of various developmental traumas. This can be even birth trauma that is unresolved. This can be, you know, things that happen before a person is even, you know, conscious enough to, you know, remember things around 2, 3, 4 years old. They can be all sorts of different, really pivotal moments. But we get traumatized, and then that trauma ends up shutting off a portion of our entire etheric body and astral body. Because, you know, if I have to talk about these terms, I like to talk about it in the most grounded way possible. But these are the terms that we use within my system of medicine called Aurelian medicine, is that we have the physical body, which is composed of cells, tissues, and organs. We have the astral body, which is essentially just composed of electromagnetism. Anything that is electromagnetic in nature, whether we're talking about the piezoelectric charge of the fascia, or whether we're talking about the electrical charge of a cell, or whether we're talking about the electrochemical movement of the nervous system and of the endocrinological system, all of those things are very much so astrally derived. Then we have our causal body, which is essentially just composed of well, I like to refer to it the way that Rupert Sheldrake does, as the kind of morphic field, a pre-formative field of energy that kind of determines how energy flows, which then determines how physical matter forms. And then the source of all creation, the spiritual source, the you know, we kind of refer to it in most forms of Western esotericism as the monad. And it is the source of all things. It's where all energy and every form of it actually originates. And so as humans, we have this kind of multidimensional composition of these 4 aspects of us that are all working in tandem simultaneously in order to create the experience that we know. So like our thoughts and emotions oftentimes exist in the astral because they are wavelength. And we know that we are susceptible to certain types of thoughts and certain types of emotions, especially depth of thought, quality of thought, etc., based on brain wavelengths. We call these like alpha waves, gamma waves, delta waves, etc., theta waves. And so it's very important for us to understand that our thoughts and our emotions primarily exist as a multidimensional component of ourselves. It's not something that if I say, you know, give me your sadness, you can't just like reach inside of yourself and give me a handful of it. It's something that's kind of abstract, and therefore it exists in the astral. And what ends up happening is when we shut down aspects of our astral body, what's happening literally is that aspects of the piezoelectric charge that is supposed to be moving through the liquid crystalline matrix of our fascia are not actually flowing properly. And this cuts off flow to certain areas of our body and certain areas of our mind in particular, because we're not willing to experience that thing. You know, Buddha says that pain is a very intense sensation, but suffering is a fear of experiencing pain. Trauma is exactly that. A repressed emotion is not necessarily an emotion that that you're afraid of experiencing. It's probably one that you didn't have time to and forgot about. That's what a repressed emotion is. But a trauma is something that happened that is so core that you're afraid of even truly looking at it or not identifying with it, such to the degree that we end up creating an entire story and an entire narrative around that emotional pain in order to justify its presence and behavior and continue to allow the negative expressions of it to control our lives. And when we do this, depending on when these traumas happen, certain areas of the brain don't get completely fulfilled, and certain wavelengths of brain activity become less impactful to the neuronal system and the nervous system than what they should. And so a lot of these people who are technical sociopaths, we can trace it back to a trauma response that was had at a relatively early age that stopped development of the brain, and primarily centered their entire way of existing into a survival mindset, which largely exists as part of the reptilian brain, the reptilian cortex. And so these are individuals, when we are stuck in the reptilian cortex, who are actually significantly more susceptible to the types of spiritual possession that we would refer to as reptilian individuals. And it's because there's a sympathy between their behavior and their way of looking at things and the lack of empathy they have with these entities, and the types of emotional states that they have are also somewhat similar. So it's not that they're incapable of love, or that they actually enjoy those things. Just like I've seen lizards really enjoy their bath and getting, brushed, and, having a spa day. My friend Robert Onizer always used to give his lizards a spa day, and God, they just have a big broad smile and their eyes are closed and they just look so happy. They're capable of those types of things, but they're not capable of behaviors that are outside of the well-being of themselves. So if other people are making them happy, they have the complete ability to enjoy that. Their capacity to wonder how they can make others happy is almost always mitigated by the limitations of the reptilian cortex. And so we have two real kind of things going on. We have one, which is a very electrophysical type of effect based on traumas and lack of inner work. And then we also have the following things are the types of entities that are going to prey upon the emotional states that various individuals have. And these two things influence the soul, which is expressed primarily through the astral body and human, when we're incarnated as human beings. And so it's a very important dynamic, I think, that we take a look at, and that we understand that trauma really is the root cause of all of this. And we all have that in common. The way out is actually through. And it's by us doing enough of our own work that we wouldn't even allow individuals that have a ton of trauma and are running from that space the opportunity to do what they're doing, because we would be enough in our own power, in our own light, in our own, etc. But the truth is that probably maybe 10% max of the world population is existing in a state where they are free enough and clear enough of their own traumas to be able to see things without any sort of significant filter that's going to alter their consciousness and their perception to any significant degree. And so, when there are people out there like Bezos and Bill Gates and all of these others that have these really easily identifiable core wounds that are present in their personas, and then they continually overcompensate with their achievements and their money and all of these other things, you can see how their insecurities never get handled and how they keep being overcompensated for in other areas. And they have no personal control. And so their way of overcompensating for that is trying to gain control over other people, both economically and through policy. And it's easy as hell to see, but you have to get to a certain point where you're not deluded by your own traumas to be able to see those things, or when you've processed enough traumas to say, oh, wow, I went through something similar to that, maybe not on that degree, but I can see that in that individual. But it takes us doing that type of inner work in order to be able to call it out and say, nah, that's bullshit, and we're not going to play that game, because this is obviously stemming from your place of insecurity, and this is not for the common good of us or anybody else. This is for you and your overcompensation of power, and we're not going to play that game.
Yeah, and something like humor is something like that lowers defenses.
Totally.
Yeah, and a lot of people think people who are funny have to have a lot of empathy, and they can be total psychopaths.
That's true.
Also, sociopath, psychopath. From what I understand, sociopath is something like you explained trauma and everything, while a psychopath, like from
Sure.
like from an infant, you can like MRI their brain, and there's like it's not the same as a normal human brain, or like a standardized. I don't know what to
Yeah,
call it.
totally. Yeah, there are differences for sure.
So what about psychopaths who are born that way? Biologically speaking, or I guess everything comes from the soul. But how do you
Yeah,
that
well,
work?
again, I would say that a lot of this really comes down to toxicity. When we talk about neural development, we can take a look at genes and genetic expressions, but when we take a look at genes, we have to look at it with the best science that we have available at the present moment, which tells us that genes do not just form in a pathogenic way. Genes are inherently a healthy expression of an individual, but they get turned toxic through genotoxins and through toxic experiences. And these types of toxins, most of them can pass on from one generation to the next for at least 3 to 4 generations. So we see a number of different types of toxins. We see, astral toxins, or what we call emotional toxins or traumas, especially, family, familial or karmic based type of things. But then we can also see the individual traumas of a fetus developing. Let's say that the fetus is completely unwanted, or the mother is in a complete state of duress and stress during the entire pregnancy or whatever. That's going to totally change the neurology of a developing fetus if they are inundated with cortisol and epinephrine and other different stress-based hormones. It's going to change the entire neurology of the way that individual it develops in utero. And the toxins do as well, not just the physiological components that are stressing out mom or whatever else, but we're talking about, of course, our mercury and methyl mercuries, and we're talking about, dioxins and nanoplastics and forever chemicals, PFOAs, PFAS, all these different types of things. Dioxins, they all have a role to play in the healthy formation of a fetus, as does prenatal nutrition, as well as preparation and a general environment of being wanted. And what ends up happening to our cells and to our DNA when we don't feel wanted, or when we don't have the right building blocks, the nutrition to develop, or when we are impacted by these toxins, any of these factors and several others as well end up actually altering the terrain of the cells, and they alter the terrain of the DNA. We call this the cellular environment and the genetic environment. And this whole science is called epigenetics, how genes change to their terrain or to their environment. And so if we take a look at that, I'm sure that we would be able to conduct some studies or some evaluations of younger individuals and, like very young babies and infants, and maybe even we have some technologies non-invasively to take a look at the development of fetuses as well, and just explore the different types of situations of people who are stressed, people who have toxins, people who have deficiencies, either due to gastric acid deficiencies or due to dietary deficiency or whatever else. And then we would also be able to take a look at otherwise healthy populations. And my suspicion is, I can't prove this at present, but my suspicion is that we would see that there would be far fewer psychopaths and far fewer people even born with the types of genetic expressions that would lead to susceptibilities of drug addiction, anxiety, depression, diabetes, methylation gene issues, etc., if we didn't have these main types of toxins and toxic environments and deficiencies as well in our field, as parents. And so a lot of times I put a lot of responsibility back on parents when there are individuals that are born with that type of situation, because it really is a terrain type of thing. Like the offspring of something can only develop to the extent that the parent in particular, in the case of humanity, the gestating mother is capable of holding up a healthy environment, because that's the field that the fetus actually forms in. And so when something's born and we can look at its brain and it's clearly different, then it stands to reason, and we can pretty readily deduce that there is some sort of environmental toxicity that has created this type of proclivity or this type of condition. And I think that it would be pretty easy to actually prove that if we extended our scientific reach into those areas. But there's not a lot of money in that. You know, you can't give a drug to help mom's terrain.
I do wonder if ketamine, it regrows damaged synapses and like pathways in the brain.
Totally.
I do wonder if that would I do wonder if that would work on a psychopath. It would be like, oh, I know I have empathy.
I think it could. You know, it was the same thing with certain mushrooms, is that they can help to create new neural pathways. And so I think so. And what we also see on drugs like ketamine or on psychedelic mushrooms, especially if they are, if the space, if the container, if the context is to do this for healing, we can see some huge breakthroughs just in like everybody. Like huge amount of healing has happened. And, you know, MAPS has been talking about this for God only knows how long, that psychedelic assisted therapies oftentimes have a much greater chance of long-term healing from things like addiction and chronic stress and other things like that, where everything else has just been trying to mask it. And I do think it's because, like I said, when we experience some form of trauma, whether it's in the birth or whether it's on a cellular level with the toxic environment or whatever else, certain parts of our astral body, our electromagnetics, including brain wavelengths, neurons, other different types of things, they just don't work as well. And if it takes a substance that's capable of regrowing new areas of the brain and directing it there with the intention to heal and to access these things that have otherwise been shut off, I think humanity is capable of opening up entirely new aspects of their own realities through different types of therapies like that, and other medicines too. It's not just relinquished to psychedelics. There's lots of different ways of doing this. But yeah, medicines and therapies exist abundantly to be able to help the individual. But I think that they're necessary. You know, we have to use them, and we can't just use them without guidance or whatever. There are proper ways of doing it if we really want to overcome these things, which isn't to say don't take mushrooms unless you're doing a psychedelic assisted therapy. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if we want to heal and get the most benefit out of these things, that we can utilize a psychedelic assisted therapy with other conjunct therapies in a guided session or a guided type environment in order to maximize the benefits and to really help heal. But I myself have taken psychedelic mushrooms in the past where I've experienced a tremendous amount of healing and was not in a guided type of ceremony. So, you know, people can have whatever experiences. It becomes a really sticky thing to say, well, this type of experience will heal you and this type of experience is bad and it's recreational and it's like, you know, forbidden by law or whatever. I just think that there is a way of maximizing the benefit. And I think if we were to focus on that as a society, we could be in a lot better place.
It's just like war. The most important thing is to have fun.
There you go. There we go. You know, World War II, they Christmas Day, Nazis and Allied powers were both playing soccer. You know, they're actually still human despite the atrocities of war. Our humanity can always peak out and reign supreme. We just have to like call it to the forefront, give it an opportunity.
Is it from Blue Oyster Cult? Veteran of 1,000 psychic wars.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, Miguel.
That's all of us right now.
Yeah, that Operation Mockingbird MK Ultra shit is going hard.
Super hard, man. Like the amount of cognitive dissonance that I've seen amongst people is so insane that like, yeah, it's everywhere too. Like you'll see just complete mass delusion from people being told a particular narrative over and over and over and over and over again. And until you open up to the possibility that those narratives are being told over and over and over and over and over again in order to take over your mind, like if you've never read the CIA documents about MK Ultra and the techniques that have been used, like you're not going to understand what to look out for. And as soon as you read those and you say, "Oh shit, that's what's going on," then you just look out for it and just say, "Okay, who is trying to repeat the same terms over and over and over and over again? And how are they trying to get me to buy into their story and to believe their story?" And then everything becomes really clear. It's really, really simple, like who's selling you a line of shit for their own benefit. And then of course the next part is just finding out the motive. And that's as easy as taking a look at investment groups and following the money trail. And then you can see why they would be using MK Ultra techniques, mind control, psychic attack techniques on you. And it's all really just to cloud the perception so that you're not going to notice. It's a distraction method so that you're not going to notice or think twice about what the motives would actually be for people to perform the atrocities that they are, because it almost always comes back to those greenbacks, you know?
Yeah. I heard an interesting thing about greenbacks, or like why I don't know if it was the founding fathers, whatever, choose green for money. It's because green, like you just look at nature, green is in the middle of the light spectrum. It represents like a balance.
That's cool. I've not heard that perspective before. And of course, you know, like I've been to a lot of different countries and places where their money is not green. And it always just kind of reminds me of monopoly money. But I always figured that that's just my prejudice growing up in America and seeing green money all the time. You know, I go to Canada and see like white and red and purple money. I was like, what the fuck is this? You know?
No, it was from, I think I heard that from Morphogenetic, if you've heard of him.
Yeah, I've heard of Mark. Yeah, I haven't heard him talk about that, but you know, I don't.
Oh, you should watch this. Should watch this, and you can't even find it on YouTube. You literally have to go to his channel and like search the entire title out to find the video. It's not like I don't even know what's going on. It's like occult mockery of police and military.
Oh, nice.
It's super interesting. I learned a lot. Like you have the two parties, you know, red and blue.
Yeah.
The extremes. Like it's like the same with the police lights, red, blue, because activating left, right is good. Like fucks you up, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it totally does. Yeah, until you can sit somewhere inside of a healthy balance between those parties, you know, that's the first thing. I think the first step to any form of healing is that if you're pro something or anti something, you're sick. You're a sick individual, because transcendence of that thing is the only thing that offers a clear perspective of that whole thing. And so whether you're on this side or this side, there's an illness. If you stay in the center, you're doing well. But if you can rise above, then you're doing best. And that's kind of the way I take a look at all healing, is how much can I transcend the facet that I'm being shown so that I'm not polarized to one situation. And the first step for me is gain neutrality on it, which is just a mental exercise. It's just allowing yourself permission to see things from both sides, see things from this side, see things from this side. Then for transcendence, try and see things from other angles. And as you start to do that, you'll just end up moving in different directions. You'll say, oh, wow, I understand more of this thing than what I did before. And it's actually so complex, I can't just take this side or this side. And that's the moment of transcendence, is where things become so complex in our own minds, in our own experiences, that we could argue it in any different direction that we possibly wanted. And once we can do that, then we have control to think for ourselves about something. And I think that that's one of the skills that has definitely been lost and deteriorated probably over the last 30 to 50 years.
Wow, this is just led me straight into my next point. somehow.
Oh,
So you have the number of Hermes from creator of the Hermetic art, I guess, is of course 4, as in east, west, north, south.
totally.
You can move in any direction from there, from the center. So explain to me how you use the 4 elements. I mean, in Spagyrics and Alchemy, Spagyrics specifically, I guess. Plants are earth, I guess. Fire, I guess, is but the other.
Yeah, so in all of alchemical philosophy, we keep seeing these 4 things show up, and they're very holographic and fractal. So at first, we take a look at the 4 elements from the most macro perspective we can get, and we take a look at the multidimensional construction of the universe, where fire corresponds to the spiritual dimension, and air or wind corresponds to the causal dimension, water to the astral dimension, and then finally earth to the physical. And whether we decide to call them by those particular terms, or whether we refer to them as the Kabbalistic worlds of Asaya, Yetzira, Bria, Natzilut, really doesn't matter. They're all the exact same types of things from this macro perspective. But then when we get down deeper, we take a look that really from the monad, we have like celestial salt, celestial niter, or this masculine and feminine. Celestial salt is a feminine principle, and celestial niter is a positive principle. This basic polarity to the universe, we would refer to this as zeros and ones, or the binary coding of the universe. And this is what the causal is essentially made out of, is just zeros and ones. If we wanted to visualize this in geometry, then we would say angles and segments. Where an angle would be a 0, whereas a segment would be a 1. And so we can see that various different angles and segments, like if I say 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, I just created a 2-dimensional construct of a triangle. And if I put 8 of those triangles together in a very particular way, of course, then I would be able to make an octahedron. And if I take that octahedron and I pull from the center faces outwards, then I can make even more triangles, and I can actually take all 8 of those sides and pull them out from their center. This is called geometrical stellation, and I can make a star tetrahedron. And then if I take all of the sides of that star tetrahedron and I connect those by segments, now I just made a cube. And so what we end up seeing is that geometry, or these basic causal archetypes, these sacred geometrical archetypes, actually refract, reflect, and cause universal life force energy to flow in particular ways that create very particular and unique energy signatures. And these signatures are really quite important to us because they determine how astral energy or electromagnetic energy is going to flow, which is going to determine ultimately how physical matter begins to form from the subatomic level of quarks and other different subatomic particulates, all the way up through organic tissue and organic matter. And so we kind of see this holistic development. So in that being said, everything also exists multidimensionally, and we say that our physical body is our earth, our astral body is our water, and so on and so forth. And this also exists on a fractal level, meaning that if we just take the physical body of something, like let's say the physical body of an herb, and I separate it just using the element of fire, we see that all 4 elements are actually present inside of that herb. The way that this happens is that first, the moisture inside of that dried herb, because even if we dry something, there's moisture in it. Unless we freeze dry it, there's some moisture in it. And so we end up dehydrating an herb, or just letting it dry out, and then we end up distilling it just with fire. We just kind of pulverized it to a powder, stuck it in a flask, applied heat. The first thing that comes over is going to be the moisture. That's the water component of it. The next thing that's going to come over is going to be kind of like a yellow smoke, and that's the air component of it, and that's going to condense. When that smoke condenses into a liquid, that turns into like this very sharp smelling acrid liquid. And then the last thing that comes over is this very thick orange to like red type of smoke that comes over, and then that condenses into a little red bead. It's usually not very much based on these plants, but that's the fire, that little red oil that comes over in our retort is this fire element. And then all of the charred black earth that stays behind in the flask is the earth element. And then what we can do is combine various of these elements together and be able to purify them and then recombine them together to create a new expression of that thing. That whole pyrolytic decomposition of things was really outlined very well by Isaac Holland, or Hollandus. And as a result, that makes its way into lab alchemy. We also have water. When we take rainwater or snow water, especially that has been captured during a thunderstorm, and we melt it and then ferment it in an aerobic environment, it develops all of this microbial life inside of there, which we as alchemists call Gur, G-U-R, the universal seed of life. And when we distill that water, the first volumetric portion that comes over is the fire element. The next one that comes over is the air element. The next one that comes over is the water element. The next one that comes over is the earth element. And what stays behind is that seed of life, or that quintessential spark. The universal Gur is what we would refer to that as. And what's cool is that you could take each of these fractions that come over that you've separated out and stick them in the freezer and freeze them. When you do that, they all behave differently at the exact same temperature, in the exact same size dishes, from the exact same batch of distilled water. You just have different fractions that behave differently. Like the fire fraction never freezes fully. There's always like a little bit of liquid either on the top or on the bottom, where it's held at the exact same temperature, but it just has this more temperature resistance. The air fraction almost always is cloudy and has little air bubbles that form inside of it. The water fraction has these big, beautiful, like ice cool crystallization pattern looking things that are in there. And then the earth one is almost entirely like opaque and frozen solid and condensed significantly more than the other frozen fractions. So we can see how these archetypal expressions of the elements that have been philosophized both in India as well as in Greece, slightly different. India just acknowledges that Akasha, or spirit, is one of the elements, so they technically have 5, but that made its way also in various points of time into the West, where we not only have the 4 Aristotelian elements, but then we have the monad, or spirit, or ether, or life force, or prana, or ruach in the Hebrew tradition. There's lots and lots and lots of different types of philosophies about that have kind of come into play, but we can see how all of those things themselves manifest inside of water. And so and even within the geometry itself, just to point to the holographic and fractal nature of this, every different geometric solid that we have, a Platonic solid is what we'd refer to those as. Those also have an elemental association, like the tetrahedron corresponds to fire, the octahedron corresponds to air, the icosahedron corresponds to water, and the pentagonal dodecahedron corresponds to spirit, and the cube corresponds to earth. So we see these same types of things mirroring themselves over and over and over, regardless of the dimension. And that's why we say that the elements are essentially a holographic and fractal representation of kind of the short coding of the universe, or at least this world. I can't speak for the entire universe and what exists beyond the boundaries of this planet. But as far as I can see inside of this planet, from a multidimensional perspective, everything seems to be corresponding to these 4 basic archetypes that we would call fire, air, water, and earth, or these elements, plus spirit, of course.
Yeah, of course. So in I'm Swedish, so in Norse mythology, you have Ymir, the giant,
Totally,
which is pretty much, you have like he was created in Ginnungagap, the abyss between fire and water, like the male and the female. So he's like an androgynous being, from which the world was created. And you find this in the Sumerian with Anu and Antu.
Yeah, totally. Well, and what's interesting about the Swedish myth, to go back to the Norse myth, this is really cool because Ymir is this large giant, of course, whose body gets spread to the corners of the earth, and by 3 people, Odin, Vili, and Ve. So you have this very interesting thing where first you have, this source of creation, this realm of fire and water, or magnetic, let's call that zeros and ones. Then you have these three, Odin, Vili, and Fe, and then you have Ymir's body being spread to the four corners of the earth and making the earth actually as we know it. Super fascinating how we're actually seeing this sacred geometrical principle lay out, and how the different aspects of Ymir's body actually come to represent the four elements in that tradition. Beautiful.
Did you know that it's actually the four corners, like just like the Vedics have like the four elephants, whatever.
Yeah.
They're actually dwarves on the four corners, and they're called like east, west, south, and north.
Totally.
And it's like a Rosicrucian concept, I guess, is that everything came from nothing, zero.
Yeah.
And therefore, when you think about Gnosticism, you have aeons. There are Sikshides, I can't even pronounce that word.
Sure.
They're always created in pairs, because plus, minus, it has to equal, together it has to equal zero.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and we see that even in atomic development, right? We have electrons, which have a negative charge. We have protons that have positive charge, but then we have neutrons, which have a completely neutral charge to them. So yeah, I think that that's really fascinating. And we see the same thing, by the way, when we go down to the subatomic level and we're talking about neutrinos, antineutrinos, and quarks. So yeah, really fascinating thing how we constantly see that. That's what I mean by the universe is truly holographic and fractal when we look at it like that. It's just that we have to know what we're looking for and how it actually might manifest depending on the material that we're looking at it from, or how microcosmic or macrocosmic we are.
Oh yeah, I have this macroscope. I can't even call it a hypothesis. I'm dead sure it's the case. Anyways, I think it was either Galileo or Copernicus. I can't remember which. I think it was Galileo. He had this concept of the solar system as like the sun is the father, and like the celestial bodies, like the wandering planets, or like the sun, and like the Holy Spirit is like space in between. I just throw that shit out. But the sun is the sun is the father. I think he's correct about that, because Jesus is the closest soul to God, I guess. I would say that. What is the closest body to the sun?
Mercury.
And which is the farthest visible planet?
That would be Saturn.
Yes, and Saturn is often associated with Satan, of course, the extreme negative, or I guess. And then you have Mercury, closest to the father. Exact likeness. I mean, exact likeness. Which body, which thing does the light from the sun hit first?
Yeah, totally. In this case, Mercury for sure. So
yeah,
and it really there's so many things that if we take a look, this goes back to me to not Archimedean principles, a Pythagorean principle, where Pythagoras, to the best of what we have written from his students and from other records, indicates that he wouldn't even admit people to his school unless they knew about geometry, music, and mathematics, because specifically astronomy. But I call astronomy mathematics because part of it is measuring angles and planes. That's always what we're doing. Like when we take a look at the right ascension, we're taking a look here, and when we're taking a look at declination, we're taking a look here, right? And so these are the types of things that we have to be able to utilize geometry and mathematics in order to understand when we're doing astronomy. But then we relate those angles to proportions, and now we're talking about music. And then geometry itself, of course, is just understanding three-dimensional distance and segmentation. So there are really three different ways of taking a look at the same exact science, just three different applications of it. And yeah, I take a look at things very much so the same way. I can't remember exactly at this point how I was going to tie that into what you had said, but it seemed relevant when I started talking.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, Mercury, he just he shows up everywhere. I've been working on just recently like this. You have like the hermaphrodite, which is Hermes, and
Totally.
Aphrodite.
Correct.
And what are the two closest wandering stars to the sun?
Mercury, Venus.
Yep. And then you have Gaia, of course, number 3.
Yeah.
And Odin was, from the most ancient times, as far as I know, was a war god associated with Mars.
Totally.
So you have like the four planets there making a. I'm still working on that, but it's an odd coincidence. I'll just say that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like, the deeper that we take a look into any of the world's traditions, we can understand that the most long-lasting mythologies that we still have are still just representations to help us understand the way that all of creation exists. And if we spend enough time with them, we can take a look at all of the same correlations that we have through our modern scientific understanding or through whatever else, and we end up coming back almost to the same fucking things that our ancestors were saying, just in different words. And it's because it doesn't matter how you perceive it, what perspective you perceive it from, a universal truth will lead you to the same answer. It's just going to be that there's different ways of calculating the answer or different perspectives of being able to see it. So yeah, I think that that's why in my work it's so important to really be well versed in every different form of mythology that we can. Of course, the alchemists were like that too. If you read the old alchemical literature, they were referring to Roman and Greek, and in some cases even Sumerian literature and Egyptian types of mythology and literature. They were referring to these things constantly and explaining, like, oh, when I distill mercury 7 times, we call this the flying of the eagles. The eagles will fly 7 times, or we'll take a look at the doves of Diana, or we you take a look at like all of this different types of symbology, being swallowed by the sea because of an angry Poseidon. We see all of these different types of archetypes in various bits of alchemical literature being written down to help explain the elucidation of what the operator is seeing in the flask. And so it becomes a really important thing to be able to utilize world mythology to help us to see from different perspectives and to utilize words when otherwise, and themes and archetypes and ideas that show up to us from these mythological characters and the way they've been described, to help us to explain and to communicate ideas when we don't otherwise have words for what science might offer us these days. We're in a really unique time period where the scientific perspective has become so ubiquitously recognized that we all have that as a common understanding. At the time that alchemical books were initially authored in the West, and even before that in the Arabic territories, and even before that in Greek territories and in Egyptian territories, not everybody had the same type of cosmology or background or understanding. And so referring to things through a mythological lens was one of the only ways that they had to communicate an idea or what something might look like, because those were the ideas that were most ubiquitously understood. So yeah, it's fascinating, super fascinating.
One image is worth 1,000 words.
That's what they say.
A symbol is worth 1,000,000.
Yep. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously I have to ask about alchemical gold. Tell me about it.
Sure. Yeah. So alchemical gold is traditionally, everybody talks, when they talk about alchemy, they usually crack some sort of stupid joke about the philosopher's stone. What's true is that there's multiple different pathways to get to the Philosopher's Stone. There are the dry pathways. The way that I'm the most familiar with and experienced with is called the Flamel pathway. That was part of the Dubuis workings, Jean Dubuis' curriculum of the Philosophers of Nature. He gave some presentations and showed most of the processes to be able to make that. When I made it through that method, I ended up with some material that definitely did look like gold once I ran it through multiplication, projection, and ended up doing a small test of its power of transmutation. And it did turn lead into a golden colored substance, and it did actually change even the atomic number and atomic mass and a number of other things of the lead. So there was some sort of significant change, but it's not gold either. If we perform a scratch acid test on it, it doesn't behave like gold, but it melts at or around the same temperature as gold. It can be cast in exactly the same ways that gold can. It can be worked with the same types of tools and technologies that gold can, and it looks very similar. If I go off camera here really fast, I can show you.
For all you people listening, pay attention now.
So you can kind of tell I've got these, it's better in person, but you'll still be able to get the difference. Can you see the color difference between these two golds?
Yes.
Here? This is 24 karat gold leaf that is just suspended in a little bit of glycerin, okay, glycerin and water. And you can tell how lustrous that is. I mean, that looks like actual gold, right? That's what we're used to.
Like, give me a few seconds here. Like this. Oh, the camera. This is
yeah, there you go.
It's only 18 karat.
Yep. So that's the type of gold that you're going to have there. Now, just so that you can see the difference in color here, this has a more red hue to it, and it also has a little bit more like darkness, significant darkness to it. This is the gold that was transmuted. So I don't have a huge amount. Of course, the stone that I made was not that huge either, but it was just to prove the concept and prove the principle here. And the answer is that this does not pass when I take this and smelt this and cast it into a tiny little ingot. It doesn't pass a scratch acid test. And when it gets analyzed for its atomic number and atomic mass and other things like that, it is not actual gold. But like I said, it melts at the same temperature as gold. It works like gold. When you smelt it in particular, there's this weird slag that kind of can develop the very first time that you smelt it that gets rid of some of those darker, redder, more purple hues that you see in the flake here. And it looks almost identical to rose gold. So the alchemists used to say, depending on the authors too, but I remember that there were several accounts that I read that they said that the gold that is produced through gold making is even more gold than actual gold. Now, to me, that's kind of what this looks like, is when I think of gold, it actually is a little bit darker like that and not quite so light and yellowish like this, especially when I find native gold. Native gold tends to have a little bit more of this because it's not quite as pure. And so we say that it's more gold than gold, but it's not actual gold. That's the thing about it, is that in my own experience, and I talked to Robert Bartlett about this, whom I know has encountered the work with the stone through probably like 6 or 7 pathways. Okay. I've only done this through one pathway. So I asked Robert, I said, Robert, you know, in all of your work for the stone, do you also find that it's just like tinted? It's not an actual gold? And his answer to me was, yeah, I have yet to find something that can actually transmute to actual gold. But if we take a look at the Greek concept, because the Greeks were the ones who started this whole gold nonsense. Okay, the Egyptians, as far as we know, were not concerned with transmutation of baser metals. they were primarily using this for priest class works, where they found that every different chemical, as it was being created, actually had a spiritual significance to it in the moments where a new synthesis was happening, or in the phase changes, like the phase change between water to steam, for instance. There was a sacred power that the priest class felt that they could harness about these different types of things that extended into their view of alchemy. But when the Greeks took it over, they said, well, let's utilize these chemicals and these technologies for what we now call the Greek word is chrysopoeia, gold making, literally. Poeia is like the practice of, and chryso meaning gold. So chrysopoeia. And really, this whole practice is all around tinging, or we derive our word tincture, Tincture, from the same word, where they would tincture metals to look like gold. And this would be for things like temples. This would be for things like public buildings, or for the homes of emperors and kings. They would have, a balustrade, like a handrail or something, leading up into the temple, that they wanted it to look like gold, but to make that a solid gold, or even to coat it with gold, would have been way too cost prohibitive. So they were utilizing alchemy in an industrial way to make things look like gold, or to make things look like silver, to make things look like brass, while having and using cheaper alloys that didn't require the same amount of mining or refining or smelting and other different types of things. And that's really where the obsession with gold making came from. And then what ended up happening is that the Arabs overtook Greek Alexandria, and of course burned the Library of Alexandria and stole texts and whatever else. But then the Iranian, the Persian alchemists ended up becoming, we call them the Arab alchemists, but they were technically Persian, just writing in Arabic and having an Islamic kind of point of view, but they're still very distinctly Persian and not just Arabic. But anyway, they would kind of talk about things like this, but they also took it into kind of a steampunk direction, where they needed some of these metallic colors in order to make different types of things. Like some of those Islamic alchemists were utilizing high level magic, as well as what we would now refer to as like machining and engineering, in order to make like a bird that was an automaton, so it could like fly for a short period of time by winding dials and doing lever work and having some internal mechanical components. But then they would allegedly imbue it with a soul from a captured jinn, or do other things so that it could they were doing some really interesting things, but they weren't focusing so much on the transmutation of metals. But then when Arab alchemy started to move up through through Spain, essentially, and into the caliphates, from the caliphates, the Spanish caliphates, and up through Morocco and stuff, and getting into Spain and Western Europe, Europeans very quickly started reading about the works of the ancient Greeks, and they were very quite interested in remaking gold. And without having advanced metallurgy and atomic, analysis, basically the way that we do, anything that looked like gold, weighed like gold, smelted like gold, looked like gold, it basically was just gold. So this is really where we today are still in the holdovers of the Western European alchemists of the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance, still infiltrating our perception of the Philosopher's Stone and what it really does today. I still remain a great deal of skepticism concerning the concepts of immortal life too, because in order to make the Philosopher's Stone, to know if it's safe, you have to take at least part of it, which is what I did, and perform two other processes called multiplication and projection on it, so that you can get it to a stone that then you can wrap in beeswax and drop into a small bit of melted lead. You can melt that in a spoon over a candle. It melts at a very low temp.
In a crack pipe.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's that.
Have you tried the conductivity of it? Does it
No,
conduct?
I've never actually taken a look at its electrical conductivity. That would be a smart thing, though, if I were just to take some of this and smelt it and cast it into like a rough wire, essentially, and then
Yeah,
see what its electrical resistance is. That would be very interesting, because if it could be used for that, that would be another really great thing. But the alchemist, I
that's an
said,
industrial. That's an industrial use.
exactly. Yeah, we'd be going back to like the Greek approach is like, let's use alchemy for industry. But yeah, the alchemists always maintained, the Western alchemists who made gold, especially Paracelsus, said gold making is good for being able to make medicines out of gold. And we have a number of different gold medicines in Western alchemical pharmacopoeia, spagyric pharmacopoeia. We have what's called aurum potabile, which is just a Latin term for potable gold. We also have the quintessence of gold. And we also have the alchemical oil of gold, which is a pyrolytically decomposed thing. And then we also have various other extracts of gold that have been made in a couple of different forms that are lesser known. But the main three are definitely quintessence of gold, the aurum potabile, and then the alchemical oil of gold. And all of those are very, 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 very useful items of pharmacopoeia. But the philosopher's stone itself, granting immortality, I don't know if you can see it on from where you're at. I can only see a portion of the room behind me, but let's say it'd be back over this way. I actually have a tree that holds like a bunch of my spagyrics and stuff, and on the top level I have a bunch of metallic medicines. Yeah, there we go. So that little hanging thing right there, that you can't tell that it looks like a tree because there's a ton of spagyrics on it and other tinctures and stuff. But on the very top shelf of that, I have all of my metallic medicines, and I actually have a tincture of the stone that I made. And I've done IDF investigations of that to determine its vitality and other properties. I don't really know what to look for completely in terms of the chemistry or the chemical composition of it, so it remains kind of a mystery there. But in terms of its medicinal potency, I can tell you that it definitely causes a significant alteration of consciousness when you take it for a short period of time. And it's like you just stepped into another dimension for, a day, 2 days, something like that. It's not a permanent thing. But it also drastically changes the way that you feel, but it does not get rid of other diseases. And I've taken this, and I would not say that I've stopped aging or that I am suddenly immortal or anything like that. So I, at this point, know enough to say that without any significant toxicity, it's safe enough to ingest, at least in, relatively decent quantities for a period of a year or more at a time. But I'm also still quite clearly aging. So I don't think that it causes immortality, and it definitely doesn't eradicate disease. It's not a panacea, at least through this one method. Now, remember, there are about 5 to 7 different methods that I'm familiar with of reaching the philosopher's stone. The red stone in particular is what we call that, because that's the stone made out of gold that is meant for transmuting gold. We also have the philosopher's stone. It's called the white stone, and the white stone is made for transmuting baser things into silver. And then we also have another type of stone that's made out of antimony that is called the red stone. And sorry, not the red stone. We call that the fire stone, rather. Sorry about that. So yeah, with that being said, we have all of these different types of pathways to the philosopher's stone. And I know that Roger Caro within the Golden Dawn tradition produced a stone through slightly different pathways than what I used. Eric J. Laporte discusses multiple different processes in his research too. I've seen a wet chemistry way, a liquid way. We call that the wet path. Via humida is the Latin for that. I've seen multiple different pathways of that from various colleagues online. So whether all of these end substances are the same or not, which my proclivity, just by taking a look at what I know from chemistry and looking at the pathways themselves and kind of going through them mentally, I'd say I don't think that we're actually dealing with the same substance as the Philosopher's Stone through each one of these pathways. They're different pathways that arrive at a similar conclusion. And all of them, to the best of my knowledge, are really not based on a true transmutation, the way that we might think of it, but rather like a significant color change and density change, which is still significant. I don't want to take away from the magic of any of this, that it's not actual gold from an atomic modern day perspective, because like I said, it still acts and behaves like gold. And realistically, what gives gold its value anyway, but our sense of perception. So that's something to consider as well.
Super interesting. You're very well versed. I'm impressed. We're coming up on 2 hours now. I think I have 2 questions.
Okay.
So like we talked about the gods, the planets, archetypes, and all that. Do you think the gods were real beings or are real beings? And what do you think about all the giant skeletons the Smithsonian be hiding in their closets?
Yeah, totally. It's hard for me to say whether those beings were gods or whether those were intermediaries, or what a god really is, or whether each different culture that we talk about having gods are actually the same. For instance, are the Greek gods and the Egyptian gods and the Sumerian gods and the Mayan gods all depicting the same types of beings? It's hard to tell. There is some evidence for that and some evidence against that, so I don't really know. One thing I do very skeptically take hand in hand after having been a Christian scholar for a very decent portion of my early years was that the Hebrew stories of creation actually were just kind of adapted, monotheistically oriented versions of the Sumerian legends. And so when we take a look at the Sumerians and we take a look at a lot of when the Jews were enslaved by the Sumerians, the roles that they played as astronomers and priest class, which is crazy. When you think of slaves in the modern day, you don't think of, let's make our slaves our priests. But in Sumeria, that was one of the things. They were very, very good diviners, and they knew where water was. They would be able to divine these things. They were really amazing at astronomy, or technically what we would refer to as astrology, but astronomy too, the calculations and azimuth and right ascension. Like they were able to calculate these things. And so they were definitely put in priest class positions. And they knew the mythology, and they also knew the word play that the ancient Sumerians and Mesopotamians used. And that is absolutely critical. If we go back to astrology and astronomy, and we take a look at the names of the gods in ancient Sumeria, and then we follow that through Jewish cosmology, and therefore also to Christian cosmology and to Islamic or Muslim cosmology. And if we also go to Egyptian cosmology and then to Greek and Roman cosmology, we can actually see that there are just multiple different interpretations of the same stars for various different theological renderings. And we can see this present both in terms of the word play that is being used, as well as in terms of the actual motifs, the celestial motifs that are being taken a look at. So the best that I have from like a Western perspective tells me that the gods are more than likely the stars and the planets and things that are going on in the sky at all times, and why we always have this idea that things are relinquished to the realm of the above. But does that mean that there were not actual gods? Because the same Sumerians that talked about the gods also said that the gods had come to Earth and had incarnated as actual individuals, which were very fucking tall people, essentially, and created our whole race in order for us to mine gold for them so that they could take this gold back to their, core planet and start to do some interesting things with it.
That's from Zechariah Sitchin.
Yeah, that's Sitchin's interpretation of it all.
No Sumerian text, or not even Babylonian, Akkadian, none of them mention gold at all. It's just something he just made that shit up. Actually, if you read, I think it's the Enuma Elish. it says they created humans to be like stewards of the earth, to be co-creators of to like sustaining the earth and like all that. Nothing about slavery and gold. That's not a that's something Zachariah Sitchin made up.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. So, but at any rate, we do see within the Sumerian legends that we see enormously tall individuals, which are represented as the gods, and we see this in their artwork as well, where the gods are quite large, and the individuals, the humans serving them or worshiping them, are actually quite small. And the word that we see that gets translated later, like in our modern English language, to worship, appears to actually have an older etymological root that kind of would indicate that it's like a working, though, a workship. And so that's where Sitchin actually went off in his own direction with like the slavery thing, is that there's a workship being had where humans are expected to kind of do a lot of the work and to do the farming and to do other things in order to supply these gods, which are essentially rulers or ruling class. But they can travel extremely quickly. They can communicate over great distances. They can do a lot of things. Their technology doesn't sound that different from the technology that we're using right now on this planet, to be perfectly honest. Whether it was through a different method or whatever else, I don't know. But I can tell you that I can make a phone call. Here, you and I are. We're in different parts of the world having a conversation. You know, we can communicate from vast distances instantaneously. So when I think about it from that perspective, it's like maybe we're just repeating what our creators had already gone through. It's just part of the step of evolution. But at the same time, I really don't know. I don't know what these gods actually were. I can argue it from multiple different perspectives because I've studied enough to see from all those perspectives. And they all have certain points to me that are good points, and they have some points that are like, I don't know about that. So I don't know really where I sit with what are the gods, but I have a lot of different thoughts and a lot of ideas, and just waiting for more data to help point in any one direction or to help to unify all of those diverse bits of knowledge that I might have.
This is my interpretation. And have you heard of Matthew Lacroix? Lacroix, I guess you say in French.
No, if I have, the name doesn't ring a bell. Does he have like a particular book out?
Illusion of Time, I think, was his first book.
Okay, yeah, I'm not familiar with that one.
He's the best researcher when it comes to this kind of Anunnaki stuff. And we came to the pretty much the same conclusion from different angles. And from my interpretation, is like you have the monad, I guess, the
Sure.
one mind. Then you have like if you think like the monad is white light, you have 7 different entities on the divine council. That's the light spectrum.
There you go.
So the gods are like eternal fractal archetypes of the one great mind, like archetypes. And then you have like each lesser god is like a hue, and then there's an endless, infinite mix of those hues, different colors. And we're like the fractal of that, just like, and the earlier you go back, the more powerful, I guess. But I do think we can, like, just like Asclepius rose from a human to a god, think humans can do that as well. Apotheosis, I guess.
Well, and that's, when I take a look at a lot of the megalithic structures on this planet, and I take a look at how some of them ended up being used as graveyards or repositories for elite. I don't think that they were built for that purpose, to be perfectly honest, based on all of my research. But I think that as people lost the meaning of why they were built, they just became sacred structures that certain people at various times ended up burying their dead in. I don't think that, like, if we take a look at those megalithic structures, I think that there's so many different centuries and millennia of different development and different ways that they got looked at. And so I think that they ended up getting used as burial locations, at least a decent portion of them, in at various times. And I think that part of that was that they were trying to send themselves up into the heavens in order to become gods again, human beings, especially priest class and ruling class individuals. This is especially clear in Egypt, where we can take a look at this principle. But I still there's still enough unsorted for me that I don't know if I'm looking at one large Earth cult. When I say cult, I don't mean that with a negative connotation. Just like one
Atlantis,
Earth, sure, or some religion that like everything kind of was based off of at a certain point in time that delineated and changed and morphed over time, or whether we're looking at completely different perspectives, timelines, etc. It's still really unclear. And I don't, companies like the Smithsonian, like you mentioned, have been covering up more history than what they have ever released. And so I don't know that I have enough of the puzzle pieces to even fit the puzzle together or to even know what the image is. But what I do have are some interesting puzzle pieces that do fit together, and you can see little bits of what's going on, and it seems like, oh wow, that's really fascinating. But I just don't have enough of the puzzles pieces to really know, what am I looking at, a whole image, or am I just looking at a part of a thing? What we first look at, it's like when we only have a little bit, we might be so close to the photo that we're like, oh well, that's a brilliant painting of a nose, and it's like, oh no, just take a few steps back, and you're like, oh well, that's a face. Oh, that's actually a person. Oh, these are lots of people. And then you just keep stepping back and seeing bigger and bigger and bigger perspectives. And that's kind of where I feel like I am on this whole topic, is like, I've studied a ton about comparative religion and mythology and comparing this mythology and that mythology and different world traditions and comparative religion and things like that, theology. But I don't know that I really have enough of the picture to really see. But as it pertains to those giants, I think that those seem to fit what the Hebrew description of Nephilim is pretty damn well. And there are a lot of cultures all around the world who talk about giant people, and they seem to have skeletons in all different sizes when we talk about big people. Some that are like 10 to 13 feet to 16 feet tall, others that are like 25 to 40 feet tall. We have all sorts of weird skeletons out there. So it's hard to say what is going on with all of that.
People still see them from time to time, the giants.
Oh, true, yeah. I hear accounts of that all the time, especially where I live on some Native American land on the south face of the Uintas. People still say that there are groups of red-headed giants that live out there. So
that's super crazy. It's just like, I wonder what kind of bone structure they have to support that kind of weight. They have to like be built different in a lot of ways, or maybe it's because if they're come from a divine lineage, maybe there's some kind of magic,
I've thought about these things to great extents, and still the best that I can do is relinquish it to ideas. I have a lot of ideas, a lot of possibilities, but I haven't seen one of these entities with myself, or with my own eyes yet. I haven't interacted with them in any significant way where I could say, oh, here I have some experience or some knowledge. I'm just, projecting upon what I want to be true on one hand, I think, and also reading things from a skeptical perspective on the other hand, and just trying to let the data speak for itself. And with that issue, there's not enough data that I have that I could say one way or the other. But I want to think that these beings still exist in certain areas of the world, and I want to think that they have ancient roots, and that they may even have preserved stories better than we humans have to help us understand how things may have happened, and that maybe one day there will be an opportunity for us all to work together without being afraid of each other or instigating war or people wanting to suppress their knowledge or their existence. I don't know. I want that to be true, but I also have to as a scientist, I have to take what I want and put that on the back burner in relationship to the data that's in front of me, and take it all as objectively as possible. I feel that anyway, we could go on and on, I'm sure, but that would be my take on all of that.
So I do a lot of comparative mythology. Like, that's one of the main things I do. And this is my conclusion. My things I've come forward for me was like, you have El Elyon, and the Bible. You have in Sumerian is Anu, in Egyptian is Atum, in Greek is Uranus, and well, I guess those are Western, Middle Eastern. They all match up.
Sure.
Then you have El, and you have Baal, you have Hermes, you have Odin, you have Quetzalcoatl. All these are, I mean, one of the names for Quetzalcoatl was like Votan, I think, even.
Yeah,
all
totally.
all these match up. Then you have Enlil, Yahweh, Seth, Saturn. So these are definitely the same archetypes playing out in different.
They definitely seem to be, and all of those things that you're mentioning are really brought home. The best study that I have at present that really points in all of this direction is the field of what's known as astrotheology, and it's where we get back to the star names, which are actually the names of the gods, and then by taking a look at the representations of all of those other stars and the associated gods in other traditions, that's where we start to see that there are direct similarities between all of these different figures. The legends sometimes are a little bit different, or they get talked about in a different way, but there's definitely some overwhelming amount of synchronicity that happens that leads me to, like you, to think that we're talking about probably the same archetypes, just through different terms and different cultural lenses over time.
And I have one final question and a bonus question. So for your final official question, the Prima Materia. Now, bring it. What is it? So easy to define, right?
Yeah, well,
name it.
The Prima Materia, realistically, from a laboratory practical perspective, the best that I can speak on this, is actually unique to each individual substance that we're working on and the different kingdoms that we're working with. And it's the first matter, not the first resonance. We need to think about that. Prima Materia means first matter. It's the first sign of physical creation. We would refer to it as like maybe even the seed that created something. Largely, Prima Materia, if we talk about it in terms of like spiritual terms, would go right back to the monad. And it's the, first spark of creation that ends up, causing creation and other things. It follows that same suit, but it's the first material, the first actual matter that ends up forming. As far as I can tell, that is illustrated the best in the waterworks through the universal Gur, where by combining different fractions, what we do is we take 12 different fractions of water. So I talked earlier that we ferment the rainwater and then we distill it into its elements. Well, once we have the fire of water, the air of water, water of water, and earth of water, then what we do is we take each of those and we distill those into thirds. And so you would have the sulfur of fire of water, the mercury of fire of water, and the salt of fire of water. And then you would do that with all of the rest of your fractions, so that now you have the sulfur, mercury, and salt of each of the elements, which gives you a total of 12 different fractions. Like, for instance, the sulfur of fire is cardinal fire. That corresponds to Aries. The salt of fire would be fixed fire, which we would call Leo. And mutable, of course, would be Sagittarius, right? So, and that would be the mercury of water, the mercury of fire of water. So with that being said, we have the entire zodiac belt essentially created, and we have the 13th zodiac sign, which is actually this microbial stuff called gur that is just like Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is just handling the serpent. It's a serpent handler. It's basically altering DNA. It's changing DNA expression. And so we can take various different fractions of these 12 different fractions of water, combine them together, and add in the universal gur, that seed of life, and various different forms of life will actually start to grow. So, like, for instance, if we combine certain fractions to proliferate vegetative life, and we add that seed of gur, we're going to get the very first thing that starts to form is like this weird proto-algae. And you begin to see these algae proteins beginning to form. Then what we do is we take that little algae out, we calcine it and get its ashes, and we add those ashes back to another bit of fresh amount of water, of these different same fractions of water, and put it right back in there. Well, it will begin to incubate again, and it turns into a slightly more complex algae. And then we keep doing that, and eventually it evolves out of algae, and it starts to turn into more of what we would think of as like a land-based near aquatic plant that grows on the sides of the container instead of on the water itself. And then it starts to like feed dendritically off of the water through its root system, but it starts to grow, and it gets more and more and more complex with every different generation that we do this with. And so for me, it seems like the closest thing that I've ever seen to an actual prima materia from which everything can be grown, because we can do this not only with plant life, we can do this with mineral life, we can do this with animal life within the waterworks as well, extending all the way into the human kingdom, which it's just basically an advanced form of that leads to the creation of the homunculus, traditionally speaking. And so with that being said, we would be able to show and demonstrate how evolution can happen just based on this one seed, this one proto microbial substance. And it's probably a symbiotic colony of bacteria, archaea, and yeast, but we don't know what to look for. So I don't know that we've ever had proper microbial sequencing. But if I go out into my storeroom, I have tons of fermented water from thunderstorm rain and thunderstorm snow, where I can show this substance to you. And plenty of experiments. I spent 2 years just working on the water work from like 2011 to 2013. And what I was able to find there was that I can demonstrate how evolution actually does happen, but in a way that is different than the way that it's talked about in textbooks. But every dead thing put into a different environment ends up adapting to that environment and being able to develop and grow in a slightly different way. And this is something that for me is not speculative. I've seen it with my own eyes and tested it with my own eyes. So I can see it, and it's something that I've demonstrated to my students many times over the years too, and shown them how to be able to perform this work. So I think the prima materia is probably some sort of proto microbial colony that is able to provide the main essential amino acids, as well as the various enzymes, coenzymes, and other reactive factors that, when given an aqueous environment, are able to develop and to proliferate. But like I said, technically speaking, within lots of different works of various authors in the alchemical paradigm of works that I've studied, prima materia can be a very unique substance that is unique to the work at hand. And they'll call it the prima materia, thinking that it's completely universal. And oftentimes that's part of why they're talking about it that way, is to throw people off the scent of what they're actually looking for. Like, for instance, sometimes the seed of gold, when we're doing the Flamel pathway, is referred to as the prima materia in that work, but it's actually just the seed of gold. And it doesn't even have to be taken from gold. It can actually be taken from the scoria, which is like a slag, during the time that we were making what's called the lunar Venusian Martial Regulus. So yeah, there's all sorts of weird convoluted bits like that. But like I said, I think the closest thing that I've actually seen to an actual prima materia is present in the waterwork and relates to that universal gur.
Awesome. So, just a bonus question, and then you'll be on your way.
All right.
Some of your favorite music, and you can't mention the Beach Boys.
Yeah, I don't think I would mention the Beach Boys. I've got a very, very, very eclectic style of music. Being a musician myself and loving lots of different styles of music, it's hard for me to pinpoint one thing. On any given day, I might be listening to Vedic ragas, and then later in the day listening to some form of classic rock, or listening to indie and progressive, or listening to metal or grunge or jazz, or I'm especially fond of Celtic music as well. So it's really crazy. And then most of the winter time I'm listening to bands like especially Wardruna and Einar Selvik. Some of my very favorite music is kind of that reconstructed Norse-based things, Nyckelharpa, Tagelharpa, things like that. And driving, steady beat. I really love those types of things. So, man, it's really hard for me to put down one particular style of music that I love. I love classical. I love neoclassical. I love jazz. I love progressive rock. What'd you say?
Just good music.
Good music, yeah, exactly. Well, and things that are provoking. About the only thing that I don't like is pop music and really, really lame lyric hip hop. I enjoy beats and I enjoy hip hop beats a lot, but whatever the fuck they're talking about can either turn me on or turn me off real fast. And so conscious hip hop, love it. Love bands like or groups rather, like Organized Confusion, KRS-One, things like that. Really love listening to some of the more modern shit that's coming out. It's like, fucking just kill me now or turn it off. So
yeah. Have you heard Winnie Pass with End of Days?
No.
Oh, you have to listen to that song.
Okay, will do.
It has David Icke in the intro. It was like,
oh, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, it's like a total conspiracy song. Anyways, you're a walking alchemical encyclopedia, and I'm very impressed. Let people know where they can find you, and let's do this again.
All right, sounds great. So yeah, you can find me at my website, phoenixaurelius.org. At the time this interview is being filmed right now, we're actually preparing to move out of this location and moving across the country to an off-grid location. And so our store is temporarily shut down at the present moment, but you can still sign up for our email newsletter. We still sell education. I teach about Spagyrics and Alchemy and all sorts of other things. So all of our education are available. Typically, you would be able to support the research that I do and take a look at the research that I do by going to the website and purchasing various items that we offer. So I make a tremendous amount of spagyric tinctures and other things that are safe and kind of approved herbal medicines to support all of our ventures, so that we can offer really high quality remedies and natural medicines to individuals who support our work. You get to buy those things, and then those things end up funding the research and development work that we do over here, and all of the investigations, so that I can come on podcasts like this or talk about things. And I've got my own podcast too, the Alchemical podcast, which is part of the Phoenix Aurelius Research Academy. You can find that on YouTube by going to our channel, the Phoenix Aurelius Research Academy, and just scrolling through the collection of videos that we have of the Alchemical podcast. And right now I'm actually recording season 3, and we are pretty close to having all of those recorded, and they should start launching here in November or early December 2024. So fun stuff.
Oh, mentioning dates, it's 10/10. 2024, 2 + 4 = 6, right?
Yeah, 2 and 4 is 6.
8.
2 is 8. Yep.
Yeah. And 1 + 1, 2, 10.
Yeah,
so 10,
exactly.
10. Wasn't planning on that. Anyways, it's been great. Catch you later. Vale, Frater.